Be fun. I know. I'll sleep on
All
it.
right. All right. So 3, 2, 1. Okay. So we're live. Great. So everybody can see us now on YouTube now and in the future. I guess whoever's watching us live now. Welcome everybody for the next episode of Recruiting Tips and Tricks. We're doing this every week, and hopefully we share information that is relevant to you, looking for a job, or maybe just exploring jobs in tech. If you're wondering about, interview etiquette, review of resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn, platforms in general, what to do, what not to do, what things to avoid to give you a better chance. That's what we do this every week. And this week we have Will with us. So Will, introduce yourself. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Fede. Yeah, so my name is Will Rhudy. I work here at Codecademy as a senior technical recruiter. Here, I mainly focus on supporting some of our engineering teams, as well as some of our DevOps and product teams. But background has been in technical recruiting for the last couple of years. I live in Boston, originally from the Midwest, but Boston's been home for the last 10 years. And so worked at a couple different kinds of companies. I started at an agency. I was working at Chewy.com when they moved up to Boston. I was their 42nd employee there, which was a lot of fun. Worked at a couple startups, worked at some larger ed tech companies, and wanted to come to Codecademy because I really believe in the mission. I was actually a learner years ago. I was a technical recruiter, thought it'd be a good idea to learn what I was talking about a little bit more, and probably not going to hire myself anytime soon, but it's fun to learn a little bit. And I've picked up my code foundation since I came back. So
All right.
It's a lot of fun.
Dropping the knowledge right from the beginning, guys. You heard it. He was researching, not researching, but you knew about the place you wanted to work at before you applied for it. I think that's like one of the pro tips that we are always sharing here every week is if you're applying to a place, make sure that you know what they're about. Make sure that you know basics of what they do, because it's just going to make you look better. So today's focus with you, Will, is we wanted to talk a bit about LinkedIn and the role that LinkedIn plays in jobs. I know that a lot of learners here, especially if it's your first time, you're a career switcher, it's your first time applying for a job, you might be wondering how much does LinkedIn matter compared to traditional resume or traditional cover letter. Or some people might think, well, do recruiters search for candidates on LinkedIn, or is this just a showcase place where I share it? Like, do I share this or do other people share with it? So let's just get started. And I'm just going to start with a really basic question, which is, Will, can you tell us a little bit about the role of LinkedIn when it comes to its place in the traditional application process of having a cover letter, having a resume, LinkedIn? How does LinkedIn compare and stack against the others?
Yeah. So I definitely think it's you want to kind of cover your bases and kind of work at a couple of different angles. So the resumes and the cover letters are great when you're being proactive, when you know that there's a company out there that you're really passionate about, you'd like to work there. Always great to have those ready to go. But the nice thing about a LinkedIn is it's there maybe a little bit more as a passive resume in a sense, because there are technical recruiters like me at every company out there that's hiring software engineers, or they're working with an agency to hire software engineers. And the main place that a lot of us go to look, or at least to start when we're searching for new candidates, is going to be LinkedIn. Obviously, we'll be going through resumes and cover letters as well, but usually, especially for very hyper-focused roles or specific experiences, we are being very proactive in going out and looking for those types of folks. And so having a LinkedIn, it just is going to give you a lot more options. And so it's definitely my first place to start. It's not the only, there's other sites out there, but in terms of just, again, being that place to start and kind of get my feet wet is why I learn a little bit about the role. It's imperative, and there's not really a replacement at this point.
Okay. And do you, when you're looking at these LinkedIn profiles, I know that there's a lot of fields that you can personalize on LinkedIn. So you can have a banner image, like a splash image at the top. You can have your profile. I'm assuming that all these things sort of like make your image to that recruiter. And, I hate to say it, and a lot of people think that's unfair, but that first impression that you get from someone, you're trying not to be biased towards it, but I would imagine that putting more effort into LinkedIn, it's better than putting less effort into your LinkedIn, right? Because I've seen some that are very bare bones.
Yes, no, for sure. It's definitely, the first impression. You're exactly right, Fede. It's the first thing that I see as a recruiter. And so I think it's definitely just a place to let your personality shine. That's not to say that you need to have a loud and verbose profile. If you are more of a minimalistic person, then it's totally cool. But at the same time, I would definitely, be thorough and, adding those banners or a picture if you're comfortable, those things just help personalize you because, at the end of the day, it's a people to people kind of relationship. And so the more that you can kind of just let yourself, be highlighted and showcased, it's going to be helpful because at the end of the day, you being yourself and the company being themselves, if that links up, that's really kind of what would be perfect. And so I really don't think, trying to do too much would be to your benefit. It's definitely just a good place to let your own personality out, whatever that looks like.
And does things like, for example, I know that a LinkedIn profile might show you the activity of someone on LinkedIn. How much does that play a role when you're looking at a profile? Because I know that some people create the LinkedIn and they just it's kind of like a go and forget it. They just make it and that's it. It's gone there. Like, does that influence your take on a candidate when you see that maybe they're more active on LinkedIn or they've had references added there or they have different I think what's it called when someone kind of like vouches for you? Recommendations. So do all those things also matter, or you're just looking for general information when you're looking at
I think they
candidate?
definitely help. I really try to get a holistic view. So, usually some recruiters will start at the top, some will start at the bottom, but those recommendations are always really helpful because they're essentially living references. And so I always appreciate when people write them for me, vice versa. If I have a great experience, I try to write them as well. It's definitely good practice to help your fellow job seekers out in terms of being able to, if you have recommendations, to share them. But no, I think when I come across a profile that looks like it hasn't been updated in 5 years, it's probably not what I'm going to spend a lot of time looking at. And so usually when I go there, I'm looking for, the relevant information, recent experience, and then, breaking down some of the key things that I know our company is looking for and kind of basically trying to see just where that is and try to find candidates that have enough of the pieces that could be, a potential fit. Because at the end of the day, you don't need to have, every single piece of information about your background on LinkedIn. If anything, it's probably best to, focus on your strengths. And so, when I'm looking at profiles, I'm looking at, not only companies and longevity, but also, what kind of projects have you been working on? Are any chance that you have to give some kind of ownership, or if you've, really led something? Those are the things that really kind of stick out. And so I think when people take the time to at least, put a couple sentences, add a couple, bullet points to your careers, not only will it set you up for success in the future, but once you do it once, that experience isn't going to change too much. So it's just sort of that living record. And so it's easy to do it ahead of time than to try to play catch up.
And as a recruiter, since you mentioned, you go through resumes a lot. I would imagine that it is a good practice for people, especially in tech roles, to maybe include a link in their PDF cover or like resume to the LinkedIn profiles. And maybe if it's a developer or somebody looking for a technical role, maybe even to their GitHub repos, if they have GitHub repos. How does LinkedIn compare to personal websites? I know that some people, to showcase, hey, I'm a web developer, so I made a website because it's what I do. How does that compare? Like, is that better, worse, or just about the same level of, like, how does that compare to, my LinkedIn kind of like not great, but look, I made this personal website and here's what I really showcase who I am?
Yeah, I think they're complementary. I think you definitely, having both would probably be my preference. And I definitely will always click on a link to a personal website for a software engineer that I'm looking, that came up in one of my searches, because you're right. It's a great indicator of what someone can actually do. I think when I look at a LinkedIn profile, I'm looking for a little bit more of a history versus maybe what's going on today or what's been built most recently, because usually when I get a role from one of my hiring managers, they give me more to go on than just, a tech stack. They're asking, someone that's had experience, breaking down a monolith into microservices, or someone who has done a lot with product integration work, because usually, especially with companies at a couple hundred, or even as low as 100, I would say they're going to have enough specialization where the recruiters have a very specific goal in mind in terms of what they're looking for. And so I think a LinkedIn profile is great to have, the history there, but a personal website, especially for those web developers or a product designer or anything that would be a little bit more front end or user focused, it's always great to include. You want them to kind of be complementary, as I mentioned, because it is great. Usually if you're a candidate, especially if you don't have maybe as much work experience, any sort of personal projects will definitely be, a benefit to your overall candidacy, because at the end of the day, it's an example of the work, even if you don't necessarily have the, years of experience that, historically is what people are looking for.
I think what other guests here on the video live streams said in the past was that a poor LinkedIn profile won't necessarily take away from your application, but it doesn't add to it. And if you are competing against another 5 or 6 strong candidates, you need every bit of help that you can get. So yeah, no recruiter, at least at Codecademy, recruiters won't look at your LinkedIn page and go, well, this is not great polished, so we're going to move on. Like they won't do that, but at the same time, you're missing another opportunity to showcase who you are, your work, your history, and why they should pick you over other candidates. So I feel like it's one of those places where it's like, yeah, it won't hurt you, but it could definitely help you. So you should.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. Especially if you are, you're happy in your job, maybe you're casually interested to hear what's out there. It never hurts to have a LinkedIn profile that can just, have options, because I know that, as a software engineer or as a technical recruiter, you're going to get messages, and some of them will be interesting, some of them won't be. When Codecademy reached out to me, I was very excited. I wasn't necessarily looking, but it obviously worked out and I was thrilled. So I think you can surprise yourself when you take a little bit of time to just keep that LinkedIn up to date, because it's how people like me are going to find you. I would agree that a LinkedIn, a less robust LinkedIn profile probably won't hurt your candidacy, but it really cuts down on the chances of me being able to find you, because usually I'm looking for a very specific, Boolean search of key tech pieces that I know we're looking for in terms of a full stack engineer or a back-end engineer. And so if you don't put any time or effort into talking about what you've actually been working on, key languages and frameworks, you're probably not going to come up in my search. And so that's what I think you can really do yourself the most good, is to just highlight that experience that, you feel most confident about. And then eventually a tech recruiter like me will find you and it'll be a great fit. But if you don't put anything on there, it's going to be really tough to locate you.
So what are the basic building blocks of a good LinkedIn profile? Are we talking about keywords? Or is it like hashtagging or just normal keywords? Are we talking about certain sections of LinkedIn that should be filled out? Like I know that there's a bio section, a short description. There's sections where you can highlight links and where you can, link to your resumes and other documents. And so what are kind of like the main building blocks of a LinkedIn profile that will make it more discoverable for people like you, recruiters, and more likely to be hit in searches?
Right. Yeah. So I would definitely say, and this is kind of one thing I've just, always recommend to candidates, and I think it's very applicable to this, and that's be confident about what you know, be honest about what you don't, and be very willing and excited to learn if that's what you really, are interested in doing, because 9 times out of 10, it's going to be very rare that you're going to have every single thing a recruiter is looking for. And recruiters know that. We're not expecting to come across someone who has every single piece. But if you have the main components, like for instance, when I'm doing a search for a full stack role here at Codecademy, we have a React front end. And so we also have a lot of Ruby on Rails in the back end. So I am looking for someone that has both Ruby and React. Now, if you know Ruby, React, and a handful of other languages, but perhaps Ruby and React tend to be the most comfortable for you, that's where you're the most confident, that's what I would recommend you highlight. And I think a couple of years ago, maybe even 10, 15, the whole jack of all trades idea was something that was really sort of kind of much more I don't know, maybe applicable to some of the roles. In my experience, companies are looking for specialization. So it's good in the beginning to get a lot of exposure, but what I would definitely recommend is really highlighting where you feel most comfortable, because at the end of the day, those are the recruiters that are going to find you, and they're the ones that'll be able to set you up for success in terms of being able to go through the technical interviews. And so I've talked to candidates over the years, and, they had a lot of languages and a lot of frameworks listed on their resume, including the ones I was looking for. But at the end of the day, it wasn't a great fit on either side because it just wasn't really where their strength lies. And so I would definitely focus on, the work experience you have in terms of your key languages, your key frameworks, but don't feel the need to list all of them. I would really focus on your top couple, because those are the ones you're going to need to use in a technical interview, once you get through the door. So definitely there. I like the recommendations. I always look at them just to see if it's, past managers, if it's peers, because usually if it's a senior level role, there might be some mentorship opportunities or responsibilities. And so if someone has a recommendation from a peer like that, it's something that'll stand out that I will flag to the hiring manager. And so when you take the time to invest in those LinkedIn profiles, and we're only talking 20, 25 minutes, it's not like you have to write a book. It's just very helpful and will set you up for success. Maybe not right away today, but you'll be surprised, especially as you gain more experience, how many more folks will start trickling into your inbox. And whether you're looking or not, it's great to have options, and it's good to just have some experience talking to recruiters. I would definitely recommend have some conversations when they come through, because it'll give you great practice for when you actually do talk to a company you want to speak with. So, but the only way, or one of the main ways that conversation will happen, is if the recruiter can find you. So, really highlighting those key frameworks and languages, talking about leadership and ownership. Those are some of the simple, specifics I would say, but a little bit of time can go a long way, especially in terms of, the ROI over years of how many folks will be able to find you.
So I imagine that the way that the search works at LinkedIn, when you're writing your descriptions, or you're writing these fields, those become keywords, right? And it's interesting that you say that you might want to be a jack of all trades, but you need to be focused on something, because you often hear the recommendation that you should try to hit as many keywords as possible, because when you have all those keywords, then you're more likely to show up in everyone's search. But it sounds like at the same time you're saying that showing up in everyone's search might might play against you, because you might show up in these recruiters, and they would just say, well, yeah, great, I found you, but you're not what I'm looking for.
I think so.
So yes, you got them there, but they're not. You're not really going to that extra step of actually getting called or actually getting messaged, right?
Right. And that's where I think playing to your strengths really comes into play, because you might be able to show up in a lot of searches, but you're realistically probably not going to get through a lot of final round interviews if you're trying to cast such a wide net. So usually today, someone focuses and when it comes to software engineering, you're either, front end, full stack, back end, and then there's some fun infrastructure stuff these days too. And so I definitely recommend having the experience and really highlighting what kind of job you're trying to get. If you want to be a full stack engineer, make sure your resume and your LinkedIn profile is touching on both front end and back end experience. If you're looking for a DevOps position, make sure that you have, some basic, public cloud infrastructure work listed there. AWS is a lot of places, but Azure, Google Cloud, a lot of those skills are applicable. And most of the time, if you have some experience with one, you'll probably be able to kind of ramp up in another a little bit more easily. And so I definitely recommend, it's in the best interest as a job seeker to have the highest percentage of conversations based on your experience. And so if I would just, I would rather have 5 conversations that would lead to 4 finals than 20 conversations that maybe lead to 2.
Okay. And I would imagine that the way you look at LinkedIn is different if you've already had a resume first. Like I know that I've talked to people before that said, well, I look at a resume and I have like 10 seconds, 6-7 seconds to look at a resume. If it sparks my curiosity and there's a link, a hyperlink to LinkedIn, I will click it just to get like a better idea of this candidate. So does it change how you look at a LinkedIn profile when you're doing that as the first step, looking for a candidate, versus when you're doing that as a fill-in after looking at a resume? Do you approach a LinkedIn profile differently?
Yeah, I think when I'm doing, just some heads down sourcing and just sort of looking at a lot of profiles, I definitely focus on the keywords, because one thing that happens when you're using a LinkedIn recruiter is they'll actually populate as highlighted words when you look at a profile. And so I can get a quick glimpse at a candidate's just how many hits you might have on a specific resume at first glance. And if you start seeing a lot of that highlight, you kind of start reading a little bit more detailed. And so I definitely think, again, they complement each other. I definitely wouldn't recommend having either a resume or a LinkedIn, but I do think that it's helpful to just show the exposure and get a little bit more of a variety in terms of where you're actually seeing some of this interest come in, because it's great to be proactive and send your resume and cover letters out there. But you'd be surprised at who might be able to find you. There's definitely companies out there that, especially today with software engineering, they're hiring remote engineers left and right. And that's not something that happened, 3 years ago. So I think right now, as a software engineer or a soon to be software engineer, you're going to have a lot more options than you even think. But the only way, again, you'll have those is if they can find you.
Yeah. I want to switch gears a little bit. And you mentioned that recruiters reaching out to candidates on LinkedIn. Now, I've seen messages before on my LinkedIn. I have it on my phone, and it will pop and say, you have a notification, and I never know what it is. If somebody mentioned me in a post, or if it's someone said something, or if it's one of my inbox. Is there an etiquette on how long or how fast you need to reply to these recruiters, or like what's kind of like the opportunity window? Like if you're looking for candidates and you see somebody you're interested in, you message them and say, hey, I'm with Codecademy, I'm interested in blah, blah, do you want to talk? Mm-hmm. How many hours or days do they go by before you just moved on that search and it's too late for this candidate?
So for me, I think it's once I send that message, what I will personally try to do is make sure I have like a follow-up cadence coming. And so I'll usually try to send 1 or 2 messages per candidate. But in terms of when they reply back to me, the sooner the better. The sooner they reply, I usually try to have that conversation within 24 to 48 hours. And then if that conversation goes well, they'll be into process and would technically be, less than a week away from a final. So it's really up to the candidate. And so a lot of times I'll have messages coming back, a few days or maybe a week later. And so I personally don't hold it against a candidate or really focus too much on whether it came back, a day late or a week later. If their reply comes in and they look like they could still be a good fit or, would be interested, I'm just going to be looking forward to having a conversation. So I don't think the timing matters, but it's in your best interest if you are interested in the role to reply sooner than later.
I guess if you're actively looking for work, you should have the app on your phone and be able to get on top of that rather quickly.
Oh yeah.
How does it work? I know that you can have profiles in different languages on LinkedIn, and I guess this is more of a question of some companies are large enough that they're sourcing from all over the world, or they might be able to hire from different parts of the world. Here in the US, sometimes it's not unheard of companies sourcing from Canada, for example, which is technically abroad. Even though they're neighbors. So how does it work in terms of these profiles that might be in different languages, or maybe people that are, students that are trying to get jobs in the US, or they're trying to get work visas? Do the keywords on a search for recruiters work the same and get automatically translated? Or if you're looking for a keyword in English, it would only highlight the profiles that have it in English?
That's a great question. I'm not sure, just because I don't have a ton of experience sourcing internationally. Most of my career has been very Boston based, and so mostly US focused. I will say I do see translations come through quickly on LinkedIn. So I think sometimes if I were to, potentially click on a profile, I will see it, be translated into English so I can read through it. But also realistically, I think it's just, if you're looking for jobs in the US, I think you would definitely, be encouraged to be identifiable by those kind of companies as best you can. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I don't know exactly if the keywords will translate, but it's a great question. Mm-hmm. I wish I knew the answer.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, I'm curious because I know that a lot of our learners are all over the world, right? And I always like to remind everyone that, when we talk about recruiting and we talk about practices of recruiting, we are talking about them from the point of view of the US. And, recruiting happens at different levels all over the world. For example, I know that in some countries it's typical to include your profile photo in your resume. And in the US, that's not the case. So there's always all these little details and caveats. So I always like to remind everybody that that's why I'm asking these questions. Like, okay, if I'm in Europe and I'm planning on trying to get a job in a US company, how would that work? So, well, realistically, like you said, if you're trying to get a job in a place that speaks English, you would want to maybe have your resume in English and your profile translated. I know that LinkedIn makes it really easy for you to have your profile in different languages. So that, I guess, the general rule of thumb is have it in English if you can. you should.
It would definitely make it. I think you will be more identifiable, and I think folks will be able to come across your resume a lot, or LinkedIn a lot more easily.
Have you seen any kind of like obvious or mistakes that should have been avoided on any LinkedIn profiles? Like I know that I'm sure that you go through volumes of LinkedIn profiles, so there must be certain mistakes or certain things that keep occurring and just reoccurring mistakes that you wish people knew to avoid. Is there any like top 3 or something that you can think of that are things that are like, don't do this?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I guess the first one may be a little twofold, but I mean, spelling errors are definitely ones that will pop out the most, especially if you use the wrong form of principal. So principal engineer is AL, just for future reference. So when everyone's later in their career, that's a good one because that does come up quite a few times. Other types of errors that are usually made, I would say maybe, and it's not something you necessarily would need to capture on the LinkedIn profile, but sometimes there might be a gap in your work experience, which is totally fine. Life happens. That's not a deal breaker. But I think at least having an explanation for what that looks like, not necessarily on LinkedIn, but for the recruiter, if they reach out to have a conversation, I think that's one thing I always notice. I do go through the history just to see, okay, this, then this, then this. And so if there's a little bit of a gap, it will be picked up, but again, it's not a deal breaker, but just be ready to sort of talk through that. Assuming that you're comfortable there. Lastly, I would,
Giovanni, actually, one of the recruiters, she told me that you can get a little creative, and people that have had a gap for COVID, when maybe they lost their jobs at the beginning of the pandemic, and then now they're looking for another job and they have that gap in their experience. She said that people get creative with it, and sometimes they will set things like, traveling the world for 8 months, or took a sabbatical, or COVID layoffs. Like some people, like apparently some candidates have started to list COVID has a gap reason. So I'm sure that you can get a little creative.
Oh yeah. No, I definitely can. You can get creative there, and like I said, it's not a deal breaker. I just would definitely be ready to kind of chat through what that looks like a little bit. And then lastly, I would say, it's definitely good to have a picture if you're comfortable, but I would definitely also be aware of, the kinds of pictures that you might be sharing of yourself. And so in terms of, you don't need to be overly professional, but you probably don't want to be overly casual either. And it's a fine line between that. And, obviously a culture or a values of a company are a little different when they're, small and more startup-y versus, a large, big enterprise. And so knowing your audience and knowing a little bit about where you're trying to get that job, I think you can kind of curate your profile a little bit to that as well. And so I think that also depends on the industry, some of the expectations there. I do enjoy working in tech because I'm very comfortable in t-shirts. So I definitely think, having an idea of your target audience is also an important thing, because sometimes if there's a little bit of a disconnect there, it's a little tough to kind of get over that initial bump.
Would you consider something to avoid when some people list as experience in the LinkedIn profile, things that barely qualify as experience? Like sometimes people, like I said, we try to get creative and highlight our profiles because we're trying to land jobs, and you might see people highlighting certain volunteer work or certain things that they basically don't really, they're not relevant. Maybe like if you are a developer and you say that you have experience as in a different field, something out. Is that something to avoid? Is that something that you should be comfortable sharing as well? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I had this personal experience because I wasn't always a recruiter. I was a bartender before I got into the recruiting game. And so I had that on my LinkedIn profile for a little while. And then eventually I gained enough experience. And I think my career transitioned to the point where I just decided to remove that, not because I was embarrassed or anything, but because it wasn't really relevant to what I was doing now and what kind of future career I was planning to have. And so I definitely think you're right there, Fede, in the sense that there's a place for volunteer experience on the LinkedIn profile, which is also a great place to add some of that stuff. But I will admit, sometimes when people get a little cheeky with some of the experience listed, it doesn't exactly, it doesn't do you any favors. I think it's also good to be honest. And if, maybe some dark humor is how you're honest, that's totally fine too. But at the same time, I think just knowing that audience and, knowing what really is going to help you land the job. And it's not about just making sure there's no gaps. So you list something that's not very relevant or maybe not work at all. I think it's much more important to just, focus on what, you really do bring to the table and kind of what you're targeting to get next. And, at the end of the day, I think that's the best.
Yeah, I feel like some people, it's easy to forget that you are being judged on your experience and your ability, but you're also getting judged on your character and who you are as a person. Because at the end of the day, you will be working on a team with other people, and who you are as a person matters just as much as what you can do as a professional. And I suppose trying to get a little too cheeky or a little too not too trusty on certain things, like the way you share on your profile, that it does also shining a light on the kind of candidate that you are, and it might just deter the recruiter from saying, well, this is a person that would fit here, or like would add the value that we're looking for a team in the future, right?
Right. And at the same time there's definitely going to be cheeky companies out there, to use the word one more time, that maybe will really enjoy that. And if that's who you are, at the end of the day, I definitely just would recommend being honest with the profile. Like, don't put a suit on if you're not a suit wearer. Don't, try to make your LinkedIn profile look like someone else's that you saw, that you want to try to emulate. Let your own profile speak for yourself. And that's what I try to do. That's what I think a lot of other people who maybe don't overthink it and just really kind of let it naturally occur, that's the best case. Because at the end of the day, you want to be your authentic self, because if you're not, you're probably, going to be setting yourself up for a little disappointment, even if you get the job, because they're going to be expecting you to be someone who you've been performing for the last couple months. And so definitely just highlight your real experience and be yourself, both in terms of, the type of profile you create and the way you describe yourself, because there are a lot of companies out there. I think there are certain strategies that'll give you more options that are going to be a little bit more applicable to just a larger group of companies. But if you prefer to be, an odd duck and just look for those odd duck companies, just be an odd duck. That's totally fine too. But, you might have a little bit of a limited options there.
And what do you think about, I'm sure that a lot of people that will watch this video are beginners, or they are junior, they're looking for junior positions, or, software engineer one, depending on where you work and how they call it. Different companies call it differently. These kind of candidates, you often struggle to get their foot in the door because they don't have relevant experience, and they struggle to showcase what they can do without that relevant experience. So what are your thoughts when you look at a LinkedIn profile and you see that there might be no relevant experience, if you're looking to source somebody in a junior role? Or maybe what are your thoughts on them listing volunteer work as relevant experience?
Yeah. So I think it's the whole chicken before the egg thing, right? And it's very difficult. It's something that's been in existence for a while. You need experience to get the job. How are you going to get the job without any experience? And so I've seen it a lot. And I would say, in terms of what to list on a resume, especially these days, I see a lot of people highlighting their open source contributions, which I think is helpful, especially whether it's a GitHub or whether you have been participating in some of these other type of development initiatives. Having links there, especially, for me to share with my hiring manager. Obviously, I'm not going to be evaluating the code, but if I see that it exists, it implies to me that this person at least has enough desire and drive to be proactive and go a little bit above and beyond. And so I'll usually share that. And And if it's great code, the person, the engineering manager will see it, and then they'll let me know, hey, I know this person doesn't have a ton of experience, but this looks great. Let's have a conversation. And so I think listing some of, that type of work, even if it's boot camp stuff, that's applicable. It shows what you can do. And I also think that, as companies continue to grow, they're going to have some difference of priorities. So some quarters, they may be a little more focused on seniority. Sometimes maybe they're looking to just build up a few other teams, and they'll be able to hire more, entry level or software engineer ones. And so I think having the experience that you do have listed and really focusing on some of that extra work that you've done is going to help you get your foot in the door. It's going to be difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat that, but taking the initiative there. And another thing, don't be scared of contract work. I was a contractor before I had a full-time job, and it helped me realize kind of how I was going to start building a career. And so, especially as software engineers or product designers, there's sites out there that like Upwork I've seen before. And so there are places out there that'll offer you some contract work that maybe isn't going to be the most interesting, but you do a couple of those, boom, you've got 1.5 years, 2 years of experience. And then you're, potentially available for a mid-level software engineer role. And so it's tough to get started, but once you do, it'll start to snowball. And before you know it, you'll have that year or two that'll help you kind of get more feet in the door. So it's always tough in the beginning. It'll get easier, I promise.
It sounds like you were saying, it's a holistic view of the candidate. And I know that I'd like to remind everybody watching this that when a company is looking to fill a role, they have sort of like a mold of what they're looking for, right? So you're trying to fit that mold, but at the same time, there's always wiggle room. And if you hear back from a recruiter, or if somebody hits you up on LinkedIn or so whatever it is, that means that you've shown enough that they're interested in having a conversation with you. So sometimes you just have to trust yourself and get over that imposter syndrome that a lot of us have, saying, I'm a fake, or I don't really know. I didn't get formal education on this, or I didn't get formal training on that. I know that sometimes, and volunteering work, like you said, if you can showcase that work is yours, right? Like at the end of the day, like if you just list some random project that you worked on and it's not clear what your role was in the project, it's not clear what your responsibilities were in the project, it's less likely to help you. And if you can definitely show, I was in charge of this, I wrote this code, this is what I did, right? It always, so like, don't be so afraid of the labels, right? Like, it's not a fancy company, it's not a fancy, but it is experience, and it is showing what you can do, right?
Right. And just getting a few of those early reps, you can become a lot more selective once you get some of those out of the way. So it's definitely good to, especially right after, when you're initially starting as a software engineer, take some of that initial experience, try to have fun, but really just know that you're kind of paying your dues a little bit, and you'll be surprised at how selective you can be in a couple of years, because software engineering is a ridiculously in-demand skill set, and it's not going anywhere. And so I think anybody who's on that path is doing themselves a great service. It might be a little slow out of the gate. It'll pay dividends. If I was better at math, I would probably be a software engineer.
What about the opposite? What is the etiquette per se when you are actively looking for a role at a company? Maybe they have some open roles that you're interested in, and we often talk about researching the companies that you want to work for and trying to build your network, trying to reach out. So, what is sort of the etiquette if someone, let's say we have an open role in a backend engineer, and you get a message tonight from someone on LinkedIn saying, "Hey, I see that you're a technical recruiter at Codecademy, and I'm interested in these roles. I wanted to talk more about this." Is there like, what's the line of being polite and inquiring on an interesting work versus not being polite, or like, doing it wrong and taking away from that chance?
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think you should be as proactive as, again, you feel comfortable with, but I think also be realistic. And so if you think you're a great fit for the role and you are a great fit, then feel free, be confident, reach out to that recruiter. I get sometimes engineers, with a LinkedIn request, like a friend request or a networking request. And so sometimes they'll include, "Hey, I saw, this particular job, would love to hear a little bit more about it if you think my background could be a fit." And I always, will click on the resume that they share with me, or just click into their LinkedIn profile and take a look. And if they, could be a fit, then I'll definitely have that conversation. But what I would avoid is, potentially, maybe spamming some other recruiters, in the sense of going for roles that are just really far afield and that probably aren't going to be, within your wheelhouse for, a little bit of time at least, because as much as people like to say, hey, I can learn really quick, there are certain things at companies, especially at that, mid to definitely at senior level, where they won't be able to take a risk on someone having to learn that. They're going to be waiting and looking for someone who really can kind of hit the ground running. And so definitely feel free to reach out to recruiters, but, just like you don't want them to waste your time, I would say, don't be overly zealous if it's not really a great fit.
Okay, I mean that's fair. Avoid spamming. If you message someone and they don't get back to you within an hour, don't message them again. Give them some time. They're busy. Don't
exactly.
Don't
and this is coming from a guy
spam.
that spams people for a living, so I understand there's a little hypocrisy there, but it's interesting.
Okay, so it's totally fine, but just do it always in the context of there's a time frame, there's an interest, and you don't even know if the role that you are interested in has been filled or if it's in the last stages of getting filled. So always with a kind of like grain of salt, or saying, you can try, but there's no guarantees, and you should always keep that in mind, that there's only so much you can do.
Right, exactly. Definitely, apply on the company's website. And then the next step, maybe, reach out to one of the recruiters if you see them, especially if you maybe have a connection request with them. I think building your network, maybe as another last takeaway, is definitely something, I definitely accept a lot of, LinkedIn requests, especially folks that I've previously worked with, or candidates that maybe I've had conversations with. Maybe they didn't get a job, but it's a small world. And I've definitely spoken to people at, several companies, and they've kind of, been able to follow me where I go places and vice versa. And so there is a nice symbiosis that can exist between recruiters and engineers. And so it's just a matter about kind of finding that right fit, but keeping your options open and being honest with yourself, I would say.
And have you ever come across anyone that might be a bit more zealous when it comes to their online privacy? I mean, in the last few years, we've seen leaks, data leaks, social media leaks. So I can imagine that it's not out of the realm of possibility that some of these candidates say, look, I don't have social media and I don't have a LinkedIn either because I'm trying to limit my footprint online. Have you come across anyone like that? Or like, do you think that will be kind of like a harder candidate to scout or to get? Like, what happens if you are that kind of person that is more worried about your private online privacy?
It's really not something that's you're not going to end up on some Amazon mailing list with you give your recruiter a cell phone. So I definitely think as you feel comfortable, sharing is probably the best way to go.
Okay. I think I apologize. I think YouTube just told me that there was like a slight gap there in the answer, maybe for like a second or two. I think you didn't miss too much information. Sorry, everybody. Well, I think I asked a lot of questions today. You've shared a lot of good insights on how recruiters think and what recruiters are looking for when they are using LinkedIn as a tool for scouting candidates and communicating with them. So do you have any general thoughts or anything that you would like to share before we pass to the Q&A?
No, I think that this is a fun conversation for me. It's nice to sort of think about, the day to day a little bit more. I think I would just really bring it back to being honest with yourself and putting out that honest persona, because you want companies to find you where you can be yourself, vice versa. I think I've seen too many times where people try to perform in a way that they think the company is looking for. It doesn't end well. Even if they do get the job, they don't stick around very long. So it's in your best interest to just put your honest foot forward, and the companies that, you'll want to work for and feel comfortable, they'll find you, and vice versa. If you're proactive, I think you'll be able to find them too.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because last week we were talking just about that, about how far you can mold yourself to fit a certain role or hit certain requirements or must-haves, and how far you can mold yourself to that before you're sacrificing who you are as a person, and then you're going to have a bad time. I think this comes often with the big tech companies, the FANG companies, where people say, well, I don't care if it's a 6 months burnout rate. I don't care if people get in and out of there like a revolving door. The moment I put that in my resume, that I've been there for 18 months, that's it, done deal. I'm going to get a job wherever I want. And it seems to be a big problem in tech, where people might be willing to put up with a lot, or might be willing to say yes to a lot of things during a recruiting, process. even if they are not okay with the compensation, they're not okay with the hours, they're not okay with how a company does A or B, just because they just want to have it on the resume. So I think it's interesting, like you said, you have to also keep in mind where you're going to work and why.
Exactly. That's why it's always best to be yourself. Easiest rule.
Okay, easiest rule. Well, I'm going to look at the chat, see if we have any questions here that we might have missed during our conversation. I'm going to scroll up. Let's see. Okay, yeah. So one of the first questions was just wondering about how to make a perfect LinkedIn profile. I would imagine that there's no perfect LinkedIn profile. It depends on the role. But if you want to maybe summarize, like you said before, some of the main areas to shine in your profile. I think you mentioned recommendations from other users being important.
Yeah. So in terms of, really high level takeaways, definitely the recommendations are helpful, especially because it's just a living reference. And so I think for recruiters and, future hiring managers, it's a great sort of insight into what you kind of would bring to the table or some of your past experience. I would also recommend being concise when you're describing sort of your best characteristics or strongest strengths, because if you end up casting that really wide net and listing a million different languages and frameworks, you might get a lot of recruiters reaching out to you, but they might not be really a fit for what you want to do. And so definitely highlight the key strengths that you bring to the table, as well as any opportunities that you've had to really own a project, take the lead, mentor some other engineers. Those are some of the kind of keywords that, although I'm not necessarily including in a Boolean search, I'm noticing when I'm reading kind of next to all the languages and frameworks, because a lot of times, especially at a company like Codecademy, we only have 220 people that work here. So people tend to work on multiple projects, help out in different ways. And so when you have the ability to be flexible like that, it's just going to set you up more for success. And so the recommendations, I guess also lastly, the picture, if you feel comfortable, I think is great, but that's a personal opinion. I think it's everyone's specific, preference, but to help personalize it, I think we live on screens these days, which can be a little tough. And so, I always hope people know I'm a person on the other side and not some robot sending spam messages. And I think vice versa, it's probably helpful when, the recruiter can get a sense as to who you are as well.
Do you, I think LinkedIn has like a way for you to take exams, and it kind of like adds those to your profile. I guess those are nice to have too, if you want to.
Yeah, I would say nice to have, not a need to have. I know that the hiring managers I support will we'll look at an AWS certification a little bit more strongly than a LinkedIn certification. Now, I think that could change over time, but yeah, definitely nice to have. It shows initiative, if nothing else, but I wouldn't try to, overemphasize LinkedIn recommendations at this point compared to what other kind of work you've done.
Okay, I see Javier. Looks like you have a Spanish name, so I guess it makes sense, this question. We have a user asking, what are the recommendations to expose your profile to other countries? Did you say companies are hiring remotely? So I think this comes into Javier. Just to remind you, remote work doesn't mean overseas work. A lot of times companies are required to have certain, there's laws like labor laws that require you to have work visas and other paperwork. So remote work sometimes, oftentimes just refers to the fact that you're not in a physical office more than that you are abroad in a different country. But just in general, I think we touched on that earlier where we said, well, if you're going to work on a country that speaks a different language than the one you're using, it's probably a smart idea to make a profile on LinkedIn in that language, right?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And then one thing I'm pretty sure a lot of people know about this, but if you are looking for new work, there is a little toggle or a little button you click on LinkedIn that says open to new opportunities. And that once you click that, it allows you to list some positions that you're interested in, list locations. And so in terms of Javier's question, if he's looking for, specific countries, he can list those specific countries, and that's where his profile would populate in terms of where the recruiters would be looking for. And then there's always also just the opportunity to list a little personal couple sentences about why or what you're looking for. And sometimes there you can really set yourself apart, because if you haven't know what you're looking for or have a specific goal in mind and can sort of kind of deliver that succinctly, it's helpful, because then the recruiter can get a sense as to, oh, this is a candidate who I could maybe consider for this position. So knowing that you can open to new opportunities, have that little adjustment, that's a way to definitely kind of get even further up the pecking order in terms of, sometimes recruiters, if they're, really under the gun and looking for a, need to kind of engage candidates quickly, who do you think they're going to start with? It's going to be candidates that are open to new opportunities because they know they're active. And so I think being able to toggle that when you need to, especially listing the countries that you are targeting to work at, definitely is a great place to start.
Great. Javier just saying, thank you for the feedback. Yes, my mother tongue is Spanish. Yeah, I sounded like it, Javier. So hello. I know that, so like I was mentioning the labor laws and stuff. Is this something that you need to mention in your LinkedIn? Let's say that you are from Spain and you want to work in the US, and you actually do happen to have a work visa for the US. Maybe you obtain one. Is that something that you should list preemptively in a LinkedIn profile as available to work in the US? Or is that something that it's more adequate to mention in a conversation face to face? Like, would a recruiter look at a profile, and if they don't see that, skip over because they assume that that person is not qualified or like able to work in the US?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think it probably does differ a little bit country to country, company to company. But in general, I would definitely, if you have that certification, that authorization, definitely list it. It's not going to hurt you to have that listed. Usually also, there's only certain things recruiters can ask in terms of like location, compensation. Every state in the US actually has different laws. And so there's some questions that I could ask in New York that I can't ask in Massachusetts, which is odd, but they're there. And so
that's what it is.
Usually location isn't too much of a deal breaker, but I think you're going to set yourself up for more opportunities if you either list your authorizations or, target, you're open to new opportunities to specific countries, just because, it'll be the most realistic option to hopefully get your foot in the door.
So I guess if you're confident, I mean, it comes back to privacy again, like we were saying before. If you're comfortable sharing that publicly on LinkedIn on your profile and say, I'm authorized to work in the US, for example, I'm authorized to work in Colombia, I'm authorized to work in Japan. I guess if you're comfortable saying that out loud on the internet, then definitely it's not going to hurt you, right? To add it in your bio. So like, yeah. Correct. And like you said, I think that was a great tip. When you say on LinkedIn that you are open to work, you can list the countries that you're targeting. So that is a big tip that we got there. Let's do one more question. So someone here asked projects that you would recommend doing to impress recruiters. So I guess it depends on the role that you're applying, what front end, back end, DevOps, full stack, it will depend. But are there, when you're looking at a project from a candidate to try like the first screening, what are the things that basically set apart a project that is just to a project that showcases someone's ability?
So the way I'll answer that is definitely focus on GitHub when it comes to software engineering. And it's not because it's applicable and you'll be able to highlight your specific experience. But at the end of the day, if I look at code, I'm not going to know what it can do. But if I go to your GitHub profile and I see you've been active for the last X number of months or X number of years to show that you have been hands on the keyboard and really applying some of the knowledge you gained from either a boot camp or some online courses, maybe it doesn't, exactly translate to real work experience, but, GitHub shows you the shaded squares with how many days you were active and where your commits came from. And if I go to a GitHub profile and I just see it lit up with yellow and red and orange, I know that person spends a lot of time on their keyboard, and I know that they could probably be able to pick something up a little more quickly. So I wouldn't worry about like, this is one project that every recruiter is going to love. I would focus on doing the work day in, day out, and just a couple hours or whatever you can afford to do. But when you show the consistency, that's when you'll be able to apply to a hiring company that, hey, I can be committed to a long-term project. I'm really passionate about this. And here's some examples of what I could bring to the table. So I would definitely say it's more about the scope and the consistency versus any one particular project.
Okay, there you have it. Just focus on consistency. And I will +1 that because actually one of our moderators on our community in Discord got a job recently, and the user wasn't even applying for jobs. He was really involved in a lot of open source work, and a lot. Like you look at his GitHub and he's extremely active, like 800 commits in the past year, something like that, like extremely active. And basically people that he was collaborating with online, they said, hey, where do you work at? And he said, no, I don't work. I just self-taught developer. And they said, oh, excuse me. And they started, referencing him and sending him to recruiters of the company, say, hey, my company's hiring, here you go. And he actually landed a job, even not asking for one. He just kind of like was so consistent and so active in communities that other people noticed how consistent. And so definitely.
For sure.
Consistency. For sure. Just going to show that you do it because you love it and you're going to keep doing it. Right. I think, okay, so, all right, we'll answer this question before we close off. We've been here for a while. Last question, very last question is, in your experience, how much age matters for a recruiter, especially in those years of job loss or changing due to COVID? And I think there's some legal requirements on this too. Like, I'm pretty sure that age is not a way, you can't discriminate based on age. I'm sure of that, but I guess it does. I can imagine companies being a bit more leaning towards one side than another. But I know that at Codecademy, at least in particular, you can speak to this. I don't think that age is a factor.
Oh, no, not at all. I think it's more, I'm looking for people that have, the specific experience for what we need, today. And so if that comes in the form of a, 17-year-old prodigy or an 18-year-old prodigy or a 65-year-old retiree who just picked up coding, I don't care. If you know React, and you can work with some microservices like at a pretty high level, I'll have a conversation with you. And so I don't think that age really plays a part. And I think in terms of like some of those gaps from COVID, as long as you have, something to show for it, like if you, had some down on your luck time and, you needed to, take some time, being able to talk about, I took this opportunity to either study at a boot camp or to work on this personal project. I think you can really kind of cover your bases a little there. And so I wouldn't worry too much about, ageism or, people worrying about gaps on resumes, as long as you have, you've been proactive, you're working on self-improvement. And, eventually I think those resources will pay dividends and you'll actually be able to really kind of get where you want to go. I think sometimes when people just get a little defeatist and then start just not putting any emphasis on their LinkedIn profile, letting it kind of go by the wayside, those are the profiles that, you come across and they don't really make they don't really stick and you usually go on to the next.
All right. Well, I say it every week and I keep saying it. I'll keep saying it is don't self-select yourself out. You have to let the recruiters be the ones that say no. Like if you don't, you have doubts, you don't think you have the right experience, the right knowledge, or you don't fit well, or my age or my experience or my volunteering work, just put yourself out there and let the recruiters be the ones saying no, because if you will tell yourself no 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. So you gotta sometimes get past that. Well, thank you, Will, so much for today. Thank you for sharing all this information. I'm sure that there's a lot of people walking out of here today thinking, all right, I'm going to go spruce up my LinkedIn, better make it look good. So thank you so much.
No problem, Fede. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. And everybody, I'll see you next week. We continue to do this every week. So I'll see you next Monday on another recruiting tips and tricks live stream.